Stay up with us now for a complete and uninterrupted rebroadcast of today's proceedings of the Iran-Contra hearings.
From Capitol Hill, continuing coverage of the Iran-Contra hearings.
Good morning. I'm Judy Woodruff. In just a moment, we'll go back to the Russell Senate Office building at the U.S. Capitol, where former White House aide Oliver North begins a third day of testimony before the joint congressional committees investigating the Iran-Contra affair. Yesterday, North continued to insist that he was not acting alone in his operations to aid the Nicaraguan resistance at a time when Congress had said such support by the government was illegal. He painted a picture of widespread backing for what he was doing within the Reagan administration, all the way from Secretary of State Shultz to the late CIA Director William Casey, whom North portrayed as the driving force behind much of what he did. With me again today, Elizabeth Drew, Washington correspondent for the New Yorker magazine, and on Capitol Hill, Cokie Roberts, who's the NewsHour's congressional correspondent. Cokie, we're going to get an opening statement from Colonel North, is that right?
2 days into his testimony, he will open it, and the statement we have is the one he prepared to give on Tuesday morning. He's likely to change it a little bit.
Well, there have been some lengthy statements from North over the last day or two. I guess that means he has had to change it.
Well, he certainly has made some long answers to questions, and I think, though, this is really his explication and his defense in his words that we'll hear this morning, followed by the questions from the minority counsel of the House, the Republican counsel, George Van Cleve.
Okay, Cokie. Elizabeth, after Van Cleve, we go to the cross-examination by Arthur Lyman. What do we look for there?
Well, Lyman has a lot of very interesting decisions to make, the tone to set, because North has established himself, or tried to, I think with the television audience, as a martyr, as a hero and a martyr, and if Lyman comes on too hard, he could add to that sympathy. But there are many areas yet to be explored, and he will have to choose among a great many open areas. But the committee members can also follow up later on things that remain to be followed up on.
Okay, we now go to the Senate Chairman, Senator Daniel Inouye.
8:15 a.m. on July 7, 1987, the select committees of the House and Senate received a statement, the opening statement of Colonel North. This statement, pursuant to the rules, have been examined and determined that there are no inadvertent disclosures of classified material. Further, that we are satisfied that the statement does not exceed the bounds set forth by the court in the grand unity. And although the statement obviously exceeds 10 minutes, we will not insist upon a summary of it. And if the Colonel wishes to present his opening statement at this time, you may do so in total.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
As you all know by now, my name is Oliver North, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Marine Corps. My best friend is my wife, Betsy, to whom I have been married for 19 years and with whom I have had 4 wonderful children, aged 18, 16, 11, and 6. I came to the National Security Council 6 years ago to work in the administration of a great president. As a staff member, I came to understand his goals and his desires. I admired his policies, his strength, and his ability to bring our country together. I observed the President to be a leader who cared deeply about people and who believed that the interests of our country were advanced by recognizing that ours is a nation at risk in a dangerous world and acting accordingly. He tried and, in my opinion, succeeded in advancing the cause of world peace by strengthening our country, by acting to restore and sustain democracy throughout the world, and by having the courage to take decisive action when needed. I also believe that we must guard against a rather perverse side of American life, and that is the tendency to launch vicious attacks and criticism against our elected officials. President Reagan has made enormous contributions, and he deserves our respect and admiration. The National Security Council is, in essence, the President's staff. It helps to formulate and coordinate national security policy. Some, perhaps on this committee, believe that the NSC was devoid of experienced leadership. I believe that is wrong. While at the NSC, I worked most closely with three people: Mr. Robert C. McFarlane, Admiral John Poindexter, and CIA Director William Casey. Bud McFarlane is a man who devoted nearly 30 years of his life to public service in a number of responsible positions. At the NSC, he worked long hours, made great contributions, and I admire him for those efforts. Admiral Poindexter is a distinguished naval officer who served in a number of important positions of responsibility. He, too, was a tireless worker with a similar record of public service, and I, too, admire him greatly. William Casey was a renowned lawyer, a war veteran of heroic proportions, and a former chairman of the SEC. I understood that he was also a close personal friend and advisor to President Reagan. There is nearly a century of combined public service by these three men. As a member of the NSC staff, I knew that I held a position of responsibility, but I knew full well what my position was. I did not engage in fantasy that I was the president or vice president or cabinet member or even the director of the National Security Council. I was simply a staff member with a demonstrated ability to get the job done. Over time, I was made responsible for managing a number of complex and sensitive covert operations that we have discussed here to date. I reported directly to Mr. McFarlane and to Admiral Poindexter. I coordinated directly with others, including Director Casey. My authority to act always flowed, I believed, from my superiors. My military training inculcated in me a strong belief in the chain of command. And so far as I can recall, I always acted on major matters with specific approval after informing my superiors of the facts as I knew them, the risks, and the potential benefits. I readily admit that I was action-oriented, that I took pride in the fact that I was counted upon as a man who got the job done. And I don't mean this by way of criticism, but there were occasions when my superiors, confronted with accomplishing goals or difficult tasks, would simply say, "Fix it, Ollie," or "Take care of it." Since graduating from the Naval Academy in 1968, I have strived to be the best Marine officer that one can be. In combat, my goal was always to understand the objective, follow orders, accomplish the mission, and to keep alive the men who served under me. One of the few good things that has come from the last 7 months of worldwide notoriety has been the renewed contact that I've had with some of the finest people in the world, those with whom I served in Vietnam. Among the 50,000 or so messages of support that have arrived since I left the NSC are many from those who recount the horrors we lived through and who now relate stories of their families and careers. After Vietnam, I worked with my fellow officers to train good Marines, to be ready in case we were called upon elsewhere in the world, but at the same time, to hope that we never were. I honestly believe that any soldier who has ever been to a war truly hopes he will never see one again. My Marine Corps career was untracked in 1981 when I was detailed to the National Security Council. I was uneasy at the beginning, but I came to believe that it was important work. And as years passed and responsibilities grew, I got further from that which I loved, the Marine Corps and Marines. During 1984, 85, and 86, there were periods at times when we worked 2 days in every one. My guess is that the average workday lasted at least 14 hours. To respond to various crises, the need for such was frequent, and we would often go without a night's sleep, hoping to recoup the next night or thereafter. If I had to estimate the number of meetings and discussions and phone calls over that 5 years, it would surely be in the tens of thousands. My only real regret is that I virtually abandoned my family for work during these years. And that work consisted of my first few years on the staff as the project officer for a highly classified and compartmented national security project, which is not a part of this inquiry. I worked hard on the political military strategy for restoring and sustaining democracy in Central America, and in particular El Salvador. We sought to achieve the democratic outcome in Nicaragua that this administration still supports, which involved keeping the Contras together in both body and soul. We made efforts to open a new relationship with Iran and recover our hostages. We worked on the development of a concerted policy regarding terrorists and terrorism and a capability for dealing in a concerted manner with that threat. We worked on various crises such as TWA 847, the capture of Aquile Loro, the rescue of American students in Grenada and the restoration of democracy on that small island, and the U.S. raid on Libya in response to their terrorist attacks. And as some may be willing to admit, there were efforts made to work with the Congress on legislative programs. There were many problems. I believe that we worked as hard as we could to solve them, and sometimes we succeeded, and sometimes we failed. But at least we tried, and I want to tell you that I, for one, will never regret having tried. I believe that this is a strange process that you are putting me and others through. Apparently, the President has chosen not to assert his prerogatives, and you have been permitted to make the rules. You call before you the officials of the executive branch. You put them under oath for what must be collectively thousands of hours of testimony. You dissect that testimony to find inconsistencies and declare some to be truthful and others to be liars. You make the rulings as to what is proper and what is not proper. You put the testimony which you think is helpful to your goals up before the people and leave others out. It's sort of like a baseball game in which you are both the player and the umpire. It's a game in which you call the balls and strikes and where you determine who is out and who is safe. And in the end, you determine the score and declare yourselves the winner. From where I sit, it is not the fairest process. One thing is, I think for certain, that you will not investigate yourselves in this matter. There is not much chance that you will conclude at the end of these hearings that the Boland amendments and the frequent policy changes, therefore, were unwise, or that your restrictions should not have been imposed on the executive branch. You are not likely to conclude that the administration acted properly by trying to sustain the freedom fighters in Nicaragua when they were abandoned. And you are not likely to conclude by commending the President of the United States, who tried valiantly to recover our citizens and achieve an opening with strategically vital Iran. I would not be frank with you if I did not admit that the last several months have been very difficult for me and my family. It has been difficult to be on the front pages of every news in the land day after day, to be the lead story on national television day after day, to be photographed thousands of times by bands of photographers who chase us around since November just because my name arose at the hearings. It is difficult to be caught in the middle of a constitutional struggle between the executive and legislative branches over who will formulate and direct the foreign policy of this nation. It is difficult to be vilified by people in and out of this body. Some who have proclaimed that I am guilty of criminal conduct even before they heard me. Others have said that I would not tell the truth when I came here to testify. And one member asked a person testifying before this body whether he would believe me under oath. I asked when I got here, if you don't believe me, why call me at all? It has been difficult to see questions raised about my character and morality, my honesty, because only partial evidence was provided. And as I indicated yesterday, I think it was insensitive of this committee to place before the cameras my home address at a time when my family and I are under 24